It's hard to believe nowadays, but a mere 20 years ago, we were living through what many would consider to be a golden age of entertainment. It wasn't all perfect, of course, but it seemed like every other year across the 2000s, there was always another amazing movie, TV show, video game, book, and even cartoon that would come over the horizon and end up pushing boundaries in their respective genres, while also showcasing that there were plenty of talented new creators to go around. It was also a time where some of the biggest hits for the decade came from the most unlikely places imaginable. However, the one thing that I and many other people at the time didn't anticipate would become anything special was a little series on the FX network released in 2008, focused on a criminal biker gang that served as a stand-in for the Hells Angels, called Sons of Anarchy. I always used to see commercials and promotional material for the show growing up, but didn't get the chance to sit down and watch it in full until a few years ago out of sheer curiosity. To be completely honest, I didn't expect I would enjoy it going in, since I've never been the biggest fan of crime dramas or gangster media in general, considering Sons of Anarchy doesn't get discussed much these days compared to other premiere TV shows that are highly praised for exploring morally complex characters in criminal environments. I figured it would just be a decent watch at best, and to finally get closure over all those trailer images that were burned into my childhood memory. Little did I know I would end up binging almost the entire show in the span of 2 weeks, and once again finding myself annoyed by the fact that such an amazing show barely has any videos talking about it on YouTube, even when its spin-off series, Mayans MC, only just came to an end a few months ago. So what makes Sons of Anarchy so great, you may ask? Even to someone like me who normally doesn't feel all that bad whenever criminals get what's coming to them in most crime drama stories. Well, it's all because the writing does such a phenomenal job at showcasing how there's much more to almost every member of this outlaw motorcycle club than just being self-centered, egotistical, and borderline psychopathic thugs. Sons of Anarchy never shies away from the fact that these are all incredibly flawed people at their core, but are also fully capable of caring for one another like a real brotherhood, to the point where many of them are willing to do almost anything to protect their makeshift family. Even if the general audience is more likely to disagree or outright despise a lot of their actions, there's rarely a time when the show doesn't establish a compelling and believable reason for why the Sons feel they have to do those things to ensure their survival and the safety of the people they care about most. It genuinely baffles me how Sons of Anarchy doesn't get brought up much during discussions about how to write complex, morally grey protagonists who are still engaging characters despite their many flaws, or how to do climactic moments in a story that completely shift the status quo in ways that makes death look tame by comparison. If you ask me, Sons of Anarchy deserves to be just as highly praised as Breaking Bad or any other premier HBO drama series for just how well it handles those things, if not more so, given all the creative directions Kurt Sutter, the lead showrunner, often takes his characters and plotlines that go beyond just throwing rampant sex and gore on the screen for shock value, although there is a lot of that in this series admittedly. Even so, I would still say most of the mature content leads more towards the Deadwood style of presentation, meaning it actually serves a narrative purpose of showing how cruel and unforgiving the average life of a son can be, so they have to savor those brief moments of relief whenever they can, as opposed to just being there to serve as gratuitous fetish material. Bottom line, Sons of Anarchy is an intense drama filled with unpredictable twists and dark subject matter most modern showrunners wouldn't dare tackle in the same gritty and politically unfiltered fashion as the show often does, which all culminates in one of the most bittersweet but satisfying endings you'll find to any long-running series. That's not to say the show is an entirely smooth ride getting to that point, but the main reason I wanted to make this video was to encourage more people who know absolutely nothing about Sons of Anarchy to take the plunge and be completely blown away by what they find like I was initially. That's why I'm going to do my very best to set the stage for what's to come without giving away any major spoilers. I still want to go over what exactly SOA does with its characters and conflicts to make them stand out compared to its peers, so be forewarned if you wanted to go into this series completely blind. If there's only one thing you want to take from this retrospective review, it's to always power through for the payoff at the very end, especially during the later seasons where it often seems like the story's taking extensive pit stops for long stretches of time, and some characters appear to be driving in the dark with no clear direction. Okay, I'll try to cut down on the road metaphors going forward. Let's get into Sons of Anarchy. Sons of Anarchy follows the daily struggles of the eponymous motorcycle club based in Charming, a small town buried in the depths of Oakland County, California. That's at least what they want the rest of the world, including alphabet organizations like the ATF or FBI to believe, because in truth, the Sons of Anarchy Motorcycle Club Redwood Original, or Sam Crow for short, is actually a sizable gang of outlaws spread across various charters throughout the United States, and earns most of their income through extortion and gun running. While Sons of Anarchy is an ensemble drama with an expansive cast, the overarching story is mainly focused on Jax Teller, the vice president of the club, as he struggles to find a healthy balance between fulfilling his obligations to his metaphorical family and ensuring the people he cares about most don't get swept up into his turbulent outlaw lifestyle. That last part is easier said than done, since his stepfather Clay Morrow also happens to be the leader of the Sons, and both he and his mother Gemma are dead set on molding Jax into a worthy successor by making him just as ruthless and calculating as they are. The problem is, while Jax is certainly committed towards protecting the club, he's not entirely on board with many of Sam Crow's criminal interests, especially after seeing all the negative influence it's brought to his friends and family. This also happens to be the perspective his late father John Teller had, something Jax never knew about until he recently stumbled across his old journal entries and discovered that back when he first formed the Sons alongside Clay, they were more intended to be a close-knit brotherhood of outcasts who all live by the same moral code, rather than a pack of wild thugs who mostly care about becoming rich and controlling whatever town they're based out of. Now that he's become a father himself and is given the chance to have a life outside of the club through reconnecting with Tara, his central conflict revolves around the dilemma about whether he can change Sam Crow for the better, or if all the violence, secrets, and greed he's forced to live with every day will eventually turn him into the perfect foot soldier both Clay and Gemma want him to be.
The concept was pure, simple, true. But ultimately, I learned the lesson that Goldman, Proudhon, and the others learned. That true freedom requires sacrifice and pain. Most human beings only think they want freedom. The only freedom man really wants is the freedom to be comfortable.
We've seen Sopranos, we've seen a lot of mob shows, but we've never seen this world.
I think it's a very different face, the world of outlaw culture or motorcycle culture in general.
You have to create very real, three-dimensional, vulnerable, flawed characters that you care about to show up to, every week. I began the process spending time in the community itself, in the outlaw community.
It's more present now. It's gun selling. It's a bunch of dark stuff that we are not necessarily all involved in. And you get to know what it means to deal in that sort of underworld of doing what you think is the right thing for money, but also keeping your heart.
It's really an established world. I mean, they have bylaws and rules and regulations, and there's certain ways and means of doing things.
The Sons also have to contend with plenty of outside forces looking to tear them down at the first opportunity, whether it's a rival biker gang who's looking to literally blow up their entire business, duplicitous dope dealers who want to chase them out of Charming so they can turn it into a degenerate drug den, or worst of all, federal agents who are willing to be even more flagrant with the laws than they are in order to take them down. You can be sure that Sons of Anarchy has plenty of fresh ideas when it comes to putting its characters through absolute hell, one of the biggest hurdles behind making a show about a biker gang comprised of murderers, extortionists, mild domestic terrorists, and possible necrophiles in Tig's case, is trying to get an audience invested in them. If you're willing to go along with the premise that yes, these are very flawed people who are going to do many terrible things across this show, Sons of Anarchy will end up becoming one of the most compelling dramas you could ever watch when it comes to exploring the ever-evolving bonds between its characters, what they have to do to get by each day as both simple mechanics for their front business, as well as known criminals operating right under the nose of law enforcement, and how even the biggest scumbags among them still treat each other like family. The very concept of family is one of the most prominent recurring themes across the entire show, not just in the sense that they all love each other in both an endearing and twisted sense, but also showing how the most dedicated, tight-knit group of people will inevitably fall apart the more secrets and lies grow between them, even when they're done with the intention of keeping them all together and happy for as long as possible. A Shakespearean tragedy is just the perfect way to describe the overarching stories of Jax, Clay, Gemma, and Tara, especially if you have a decent knowledge about the characters and plot points from his most famous stories. That's not to say you need to be a highbrow intellectual to enjoy Sons of Anarchy, as this is still a show about a group of cavalier bikers who love to poke degrading jokes at each other, hook up with practically every pretty woman who crosses their path, and coming up with new creative ideas to make fools out of the people looking to tear them down. None of that would be possible without likable and engaging characters, of course, and it's high time I start explaining why Sons of Anarchy's 4 leads are some of the most compelling in any serialized drama.
That's before.
Don't ever sit on another man's bike, asshole.
Holy shit!
Shut up, bitch! Little respect for the fairer sex.
That's after. Where you headed?
No place special.
Me too.
I'm Susie.
Jax.
I'd be willing to bet that when most people tune into a show like Sons of Anarchy, they expect somebody like Jax Teller to serve as the perpetual cool guy meant to show off all the perks of living as a rogue outlaw, and isn't all that fazed by Sam Crow's illicit activities. While that's definitely one component to his character, the truth is Jax is a far more complicated man than most people give him credit for. What sets him apart from Clay and the other seasoned members of the club is the fact he's a free-spirited young man with no greater aspirations beyond coasting through life on the seat of his Harley and sweeping every pretty girl he comes across off her feet before getting back on the road without a care in the world. As the club's VP, he's been on the front lines and engaged in deadly firefights on more than one occasion, but he was always more of an extra enforcer just looking out for his friends, compared to other sons like Happy or Tig, who are basically Clay's standby executioners. Still, Jax never felt compelled to question whether Sam Crow should be anything more than a violent gang of gun runners until he stumbled across his dad's old journals. Now that he's taken on the responsibility of caring for his newborn son Abel and has the chance to build a real family between him and his old high school crush Tara, it slowly starts to dawn on him that maybe he can uphold his father's legacy and steer the Sons of Anarchy towards a more positive direction. However, Jax soon realizes that in order to get anything accomplished, he can't always push back against Clay's calls for bloody retribution, extorting favors from innocents and even the charming PD, or even manipulating their own circle of friends and family, because those decisions are what usually instills fear and respect from their enemies like the Mayans, as well as trust and loyalty from the Sons themselves, since it also proves that Clay's looking out for their best interests. The road to hell is paved with good intentions after all, and even if Jax eventually grows to hate doing anything that puts him on the same level as Clay, it's also true that their line of work is filled with vindictive sociopaths just like him, and if they ever found out that Sam Crow was run by people unwilling to make any hard calls, that only ends up putting all of them at even more risk and gives their enemies easy leverage to take them out, which would cause even more crime and degeneracy to spread across Charming. Don't take that to mean, however, that Jax will sit idly by whenever Clay orders something that crosses a major line and doesn't have a less bloody alternative at the very least.
Put down the gun. What? We don't kill women. Let's go. You see this guy? He's a bad guy, and he wants you dead. You know why? Because you're gonna rat on 2 of his friends! And next time, I won't be there to save your life, you understand? If you testify, you will die.
I won't, I promise.
Get a train, get a bus, you steal a goddamn car, I don't give a shit. You get out of California tonight, or you're dead!
You just crossed the line, brother.
Not yet.
As you can probably tell by now, Jax Teller is an anti-hero in the same vein as Walter White or Tony Soprano, characters who steadily become more cruel and pragmatic in order to get what they want, but still have somewhat honorable intentions and still try to do what's best for the people they care about, even when they end up hating them for it. I can understand why there are people who don't like anti-hero type characters who do terrible things for the sake of their own agenda, but what kept me invested in Jax despite the times he does compromise on his beliefs is the fact that it's rarely for selfish reasons as we so often see with Clay. His willingness to put his own life on the line when called for and keep his word to others who show them the same level of respect is what makes Jax an easy character to root for throughout the bulk of the series, especially during all the times he does make difficult choices and has to suck up the consequences. A great example of that is how his friendship with Opie Winston, his childhood buddy who's been just as loyal to Sam Crow from the beginning, is put to the ultimate test when Clay does something that ends up ruining his life and sets him down a dark path of revenge and self-loathing. This is the major event that fundamentally turns Jax against Clay and how he runs the club. But as much as he may want to tell Opie the truth about what was done to him, it could also create a major rift that results in everyone in the club turning against each other and thus destroying one of the only things that's keeping his friend going in spite of all the hardships he's suffered. So, Jax decides to prove to everyone there's a better and more honest way of doing things than Clay's ideas, which not only serves as his way to get justice for Opie, but also sets the stage for converting many of the Sons to his side in order to ensure nothing like that could ever happen again. Ironically, this ends up putting him at odds with Opie himself, since he still thinks Clay's methods are necessary to protect the Sons from the very thing he caused, but Jax still doesn't come clean with him because he knows he's still operating under the same mindset Clay wants all of them to have to make them think they need him as their leader. You can tell how much that fact aggravates Jax to no end whenever he tries to change things for the better, only for their situation to get worse and make Clay seem like he was right all along.
This club has lost its way. And I thought I was the guy that was gonna change that. And then I realized that arrogance is what drove my old man into the ground.
Defeat is not what killed your father.
I don't want to hear about history. I'm taking care of what's in front of me. This ain't about the club, Piney. It's about my family.
I won't tell you how much you just sounded like your old man. And before you let him die, you should find him. And know that for yourself.
It's so embarrassing to say as an Englishman, but I'd been working in America for so long that when I got King Arthur, I had to hire a dialect coach to help me sound English again. I had an extraordinary experience in researching this role and this character where we had a wonderful producer called John Linson. And through John, I had access to a motorcycle club from Oakland, a well-known club. And I got to meet the guy that I was going to play. There's a kid called Chill Will. And I met him and spent 4 days with him and loved him and got to see what the real of this thing was. But I had to come back and work with Kurt because we were about to start shooting the show. Unfortunately, Will lost his life at that day. I then felt this responsibility in a way to honor him through this character. You know, I wore white tennis shoes, but this kid was a 19-year-old West Coast Oakland badass, and he's gonna wear sneakers and Dickies, and that was his vibe. So I modeled a lot on Chill Will, and I got a lot of criticism, you know, bikers wear leather boots sort of vibe. I just went, okay, well, you know, maybe most bikers do, but these ones don't. And so I knew that it was going to be rough after 8 years of living with Jax to try to say goodbye to him. I'd shared my psyche and body with him.
I'm sure it goes without saying at this point what a phenomenal job Charlie Hunnam does as Jax Teller. I can't give enough credit for how well he conveys all of Jax's emotional turmoil across the series. Whether it's through all of the bitterness or doubt that shines through his eyes every time he deals with Clay, show-stealing monologues where he finally expresses much of the frustration he constantly has to hold back, and those brief moments of levity where he allows himself to cut loose and express just how much he cares for the people around him, even if he doesn't always show it. What I really came to respect about Jax, and most of the characters in Sons of Anarchy as a whole, is the fact the writing usually doesn't delve into the annoying postmodern trope of trying to make them out to be misunderstood heroes whose actions are always justified because they have some arbitrary aspect about them you should sympathize with by default. In Jax's case, the show doesn't try to paint him as a saint for merely having Tara and Abel in his life, nor does it suggest that he should be totally fine with all the questionable things he's done, since it was all for their sake. That's the key distinction that separates Jax from everyone around him, and just like his father before him, that courage to own up to his mistakes, put the needs of others before himself, and look past short-term profits if it means building a better future for them all, that makes Jax Teller a good man to his core, even when he's forced to stoop to the same methods as somebody like Clay. It all circles back to the overarching idea the show's constantly pushing about what people are willing to do for the sake of their families. Sure, the other sons are fully capable and willing to lie, cheat, steal, and even murder for each other, but only the few best among them would be willing to sacrifice everything for somebody else. That's the core value John Teller wanted to bring back to Sam Crow before he died, and it's what drives Jax to do everything he can to steer the club away from businesses and people who only bring out their worst nature, so the others can eventually learn to cherish their brotherhood the same way he does. It may be a grim, long, and often depressing journey for Jax going forward, and I admit I had to take a few breaks in between the show's later seasons when the drama got a little too heavy, but I can still confidently say the experience is still worth it in the end just to see how Jax beats the odds, and the way his ever-evolving dynamic with Clay unfolds.
Now you listen to me. What he read there were the ramblings of a bitter, grieving coward. So don't tell me he's poisoned. You better calm down. This is about your fear, your history. You stop bleeding all over him. And finish burning that.
The interesting thing about Clay is that despite being the most ruthless and antagonistic member of the Sons, he's not really the main villain of the series. Don't get me wrong, he's still a nasty piece of work responsible for many of Sam Crow's most heinous crimes, but there are many points across the show where he and Jax aren't fighting each other, and even after it reaches the point where they become full-blown mortal enemies, their beef is usually a secondary conflict compared to what's going on with the new threat who's just rolled into Charming and the Sons' efforts to take them down. I would say it's more accurate to call Clay the existential main antagonist for Jax, someone who absolutely poses the biggest obstacle towards all the reforms he wants to bring to Sam Crow, but also serves as one of his best allies when it comes to protecting it as well. In fact, their relationship at the beginning of the series makes it clear that Clay would like nothing better than to get along with his stepson, since the two of them make for an effective team when they're not at each other's throats. What's more, Clay doesn't do things like blackmail, prioritize business over the lives of certain people, or make drastic snap judgment calls just because he wants to be a selfish asshole. True, he's a manipulative, self-absorbed person at his core, but like I said earlier, he's managed to keep even worse people out of Charming by demonstrating Sam Crow can be just as vicious and calculating at a moment's notice. Clay can still make rational and even somewhat honorable decisions once it becomes clear that doing things in his preferred method is guaranteed to have serious blowback on him, as well as everybody in Charming. But rest assured, whenever Clay's up against an even bigger depraved bastard who isn't willing to make a deal and crosses one of the few moral boundaries he has, he's always ready to live up to his reputation and go literal scorched earth.
Nah. You and me, Marky, we're gonna have our own little MC summit.
Well, yeah. We're just gonna figure it all out, are we?
You need real guns. I need real money. Maybe it's time for me to expand my customer base.
What's your
peace of mind.
Let him bleed out.
Shit, oh shit. I smell the stink of your crank and your pussy anywhere near Charming. I'll put 3 bullets in your neck.
Light it up. Oh, shit.
Where's your father?
I don't know.
Holly! Holly! Lock.
Welcome back.
You're just gonna let this happen?
Walk out the door.
No. You want to kill me? Do it here on Main Street.
Fine.
I was just trying to accommodate our friend with the badge.
Clay Morrow playing him in Sons of Anarchy. How much of a toll did that take on you? That was one real badass individual you played for such a long time.
It was really weird. I mean, I never really had to do much physical stuff as Clay, except pick up the bike that I had just dropped, because I set a record for dropping the bike while filming. Mm-hmm. It was such an ensemble show, and there were so many other amazing go-to guys on the program that I never really remember breaking a sweat. I mean, I had a few great moments here and there, mm-hmm. and certainly a presence, but It was very evenly doled out.
One of the best parts about Ron Perlman's performance is how menacing he can make Clay even when he's just sitting at the head of their table, but can also express just a few flashes of humanity whenever he's forced to confront his worst actions, as well as the fact that no matter how far he goes, age will eventually take away his title on top of everything else he's fought so hard to maintain. Jax, along with his father's ideas, represents everything Clay fears most. A new and arguably weaker vision for Sam Crow that threatens to tear apart the one he spent decades building up himself. The cruel irony behind Clay's story is that if things had worked out just a little differently, he could have remained the beloved and trusted leader of the Sons a while longer, and shown Jax that his deplorable methods are what kept street crime to a bare minimum and charming, in addition to making Sam Crow lucrative and fulfilling for everyone involved. We even get to see a few instances across seasons 1 through 4 where Clay does get Jax on board with his plans, and in some ways, it does strengthen their complicated bond, like when he pushes Jax to go on the warpath against the Irish nationalists in order to find his kidnapped son. However, like with most two-faced people, nearly all of his perceived good deeds are entirely for selfish reasons, and it's because of Clay's relentless greed, his prideful denial towards owning up to his greatest transgressions, and his wrathful tendency to lash out at the people he's meant to be close to when they don't do everything he wants, like Jax, Tig, and even Gemma at several points, that almost everything he works so hard for ends up crashing down around him in spectacular fashion. Whether he's a helpful mentor in one instance, or a conniving bastard in another, Clay's ability to shift between those two extremes at any given time, and still be captivating either way, is what makes him one of the best characters in all of Sons of Anarchy, on top of being a great counterpoint to all of Jax's beliefs and aspirations. My only real gripe surrounding his character is that by season 4 onwards, when he ultimately does become the main villain of that particular season, I'll just say from that point forward, his role in the story becomes noticeably less interesting. To put this as vaguely as possible, Jax has him dead to rights and every reason to kill him once and for all, but then chooses to keep him around in order to use his connections and insight for all they're worth. That's not to say I don't like where Clay's story ultimately goes, and I still admire how much Kurt Sutter was willing to shake up the status quo even after everything he'd set in stone across 4 previous seasons. Very few shows are willing to go as far as making one of its primary characters an irredeemable villain, and then forcing that same character to confront all the damage they caused, and trying to see if there's anything they can do to make up for it, even if it is too little too late. Getting through the latter half of Clay's story can definitely feel like a grind at times, but it's still worth getting through just to see how Clay handles the harsh reality that all of the respect and trust he spent years building between these people can never be reclaimed.
You don't have to believe this, Jim, but it's true. The only good that came out of all the chaos that I created is that it showed me the only thing I care about is you, baby. I can't handle losing you twice.
That's the kind of hard-hitting drama that demonstrates what you can do with a fallen character beyond just killing them off, and I'm glad Sons of Anarchy was willing to go to those lengths with Clay, along with several other characters you wouldn't expect. Bottom line, Clay serves as a great overarching antagonist for the series, and as a nuanced character with more depth than people give him credit for. What's ironic is that the person responsible for bringing out those few humane aspects also happens to be the same one encouraging and outright pressuring him into doing his worst deeds.
It was never charity, Donna. It's what we do. Your family.
I have my family back. I don't need yours.
But Sam Crow is not the enemy. It's the glue. The one thing that will always be there to pull you through the ugly shit. We're having a little family dinner tonight. You and Hope should come. Bring the kids. You might actually have a good time. Don't say anything else. My Martha Stewart's wearing real thin.
When I first watched Sons of Anarchy, I only knew Katie Sagal as Peggy from Married with Children and the voice of Leela from Futurama, so I'm sure you can imagine how shocking it was for me to see her turn in a serious drama role as a badass biker lady. If there was anyone who ever scoffed at the notion that there were any parallels between this show and the works of Shakespeare, I'd like to see that person try to show me a better representation of a Lady Macbeth type character than Gemma Teller. From the first moment we're introduced to her in the series premiere all the way to its bitter finale, Gemma is always striving to not just protect her family, but to also ensure that their dynasty will be strong and capable enough to safeguard Sam Crow's future for many generations to come. That's why she has such a strong fixation on multiple molding Jax into a worthy successor to Clay, and is almost always hostile towards every woman he associates with who doesn't meet her lofty standards. Family means everything to Gemma, and if she ever gets even the smallest hint that there's something threatening them, or even her overarching intentions for them, you can be sure she'll do whatever it takes to snuff it out at the core, and isn't afraid to get her own hands dirty if necessary. That being said, it's never impossible to see just a glint of logic, or even well-meaning behind her actions, however cruel and outright savage they can be at times. The pilot episode alone showcases two great examples of this, where we see Gemma take on a more compassionate side as she encourages Jax to not give up on Abel because of his heart condition, only to become a full-blown sadist when she confronts his ex-wife Wendy later, and makes it crystal clear that she won't let her do any more harm to Abel, even if that calls for removing her from his life entirely.
You gotta go see him, Jax.
I can't.
It's called being a father.
For how long? A day? A week?
You know, you were born with that same heart defect your little brother had. Seemed pretty sturdy to me. Tellers do not die easy.
No, I just died bloody.
And that's the Irish in us. Okay, darling.
Night, Mom.
Night, baby. I understand you and the old girlfriend have become buddies. It's a little late for the panic button.
I didn't say anything to anyone.
No one would believe you anyhow. That whole junkie thing. All I did was give you an option, sweetheart. Couldn't even do that right.
We all can't be rocks like you, Mother Gemma. I don't know how you do it. Your conscience must be locked up real tight.
Nothing gets in the way of me taking care of my family. Especially my conscience. You obviously can't grasp that. Being a baby killer and all.
Yeah, I think it speaks to people's motivation. You know, I know in the case of Gemma, she's all about protection and loyalty of these people that she seriously loves, and she doesn't see the morality. It doesn't even faze her to cross that line. And, you know, she doesn't think it's despicable. She's just doing what she needs to do.
Of course, Seagal is best known for having played Peg Bundy on the sitcom Married with Children.
The bowling alley? You're taking me bowling on my birthday?
In real life, she's married to Sons of Anarchy creator Kurt Sutter. And she says Sutter wrote the Sons of Anarchy role specifically for her.
You know, I really had worked so much in comedy, which I love, but I felt like I've done this in a pretty good way, and I think I'd really love to do something else. So I really did. I needed a big sort of, not only a creative turn, but you know, work-wise. You know, I wanted to use these chops, and you know, my husband has always been a very, you know, he supports me too. So he said, "I'm writing you a great part. We're going to show him what you can do."
And you did.
Jax and Clay may often do more visceral things to their adversaries, but there are a fair few times where Gemma's actions cause a lot more damage, to the point where she ends up looking far worse than them by comparison. It all comes down to how she manipulates everyone around her, either by telling them elaborate lies that she believes is for that person's own good, forcing them to keep earth-shattering secrets in order to spare Sam Crow from any more complications that could drive them apart, and in the worst cases, taking drastic measures into her own hands by escalating her conflicts with other people into do-or-die scenarios. Based on all of that, I can't blame anyone who thinks Gemma's a very detestable person at her core, but Sons of Anarchy also puts her in many scenarios where she does legitimately try to help other people, and even apologize to people like Tara over the things she did to her. One of the most captivating plotlines of the entire series is the progression of their relationship, starting out with her absolutely hating Tara's guts and doing everything in her power to chase her away from Jax, then evolving into a pseudo-mentor-student dynamic, which then grows into a genuine caring bond between the two of them for a good chunk of the series. This doesn't magically make Gemma a better person by any stretch, but it does reinforce reinforce the overarching idea behind her character about how much she's willing to sacrifice or make peace with for the sake of family. That's what makes Gemma's plotlines engaging and even somewhat endearing across the entire series, because nearly all of them center around putting her in vulnerable situations where she's left without much of the control and influence she had at the beginning of the series, which often leads to her having to own up to many of the things she's done in particularly brutal ways. At the same time, the narrative doesn't try to make Gemma out to be a helpless victim, or that anyone from the audience to the characters themselves should pity her because of all the hardship she faces. Merely suggesting that idea would be enough to provoke her into kicking your ass right then and there, which in my opinion makes Gemma far more respectable for taking full ownership over what kind of person she is, and not making excuses for that beyond believing it's what she thought was the best thing to do. Don't take that to mean, however, that she doesn't try to cover up her biggest mistakes, especially one that's almost entirely responsible for making Jax the way he is at the beginning of the series and what he devolves into by the end. A large portion of the first 4 seasons, especially seasons 3 and 4, centers around her desperate efforts to keep the truth hidden from him and make sure he doesn't develop the same kind of soft heart as his father, which was what drove her to Clay in the first place. Unfortunately, while there's no denying that Clay does care deeply about her, the problem behind a pair of ambitious, spiteful, and backstabbing people shacking up with each other is that it doesn't take much to stir up strong disagreements between them, or for one of their ambitions to become more important than the other person's happiness and well-being, especially if it revolves around the leader of an outlaw biker gang making more money and securing his position.
What the hell did you do?
Same thing you did. Nailed some little tart from Nevada.
Hey! I didn't tell her to come here!
But she's here!
Well, it's not my fault!
And it's not my pussy!
And that's why I'm single.
You wrote it all down. All his pathetic hopes and dreams. John is speaking to him from the goddamn grave.
You'll be in hysterical.
I told you to nail Jax down. Bring him closer.
This is a bunch of words. This is a bunch of shit!
It means everything to my Jax. What happened to John? I cannot do that again. What's the matter? Get a refund because they didn't kill her?
I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Promise me.
Jesus Christ! Those babies could have been hurt!
Enough!
You stay away from me, you son of a bitch. You stay away from my family.
That last clip perfectly exemplifies why I can't help but respect Gemma in spite of everything she is, because there really is no limit to what she'll do to protect her loved ones. One of my personal favorite examples of this occurs at the beginning of season 2, where something truly awful is done to Gemma that not even the most bloodthirsty, selfish son would ever consider doing to anyone else. Naturally, given what person Gemma's been established to be at this point, you would assume she'd be willing to burn down Charming itself if it meant getting those bastards. But Gemma insists on keeping it a secret because she knows it would only add tension to the growing feud between Jax and Clay, not to mention drive them along with the other sons into doing something irrationally stupid that their enemies can later exploit. It's only after the feud reaches a breaking point that threatens to divide the club and remove one of them from the picture entirely that she decides to sit them down to explain what happened so they can put aside their differences and work together to get justice in her name. There's no denying the relationship between them all is pretty twisted and manipulative, but Sons of Anarchy excels at showing that there's still genuine love buried beneath all the deception, lies, and even murder. That's what makes Gemma's story so tragic in retrospect, for it was because of her incessant need to control everything and always be the one to decide what's best for the family that it ended up falling apart as a result. Just like with Jax and Clay, Gemma could have had everything she wanted if she just didn't follow her natural impulses, and that sentiment couldn't be more applicable when it comes to Tara.
What's the run?
Blood drive.
Sam Crow, community servants.
That's what we're all about, baby.
Yeah.
What?
I'm your old lady.
Come on, let's get you some breakfast. Huh?
I have many mixed opinions about Tara. On the one hand, she has solid romantic chemistry with Jax, and she's always willing to provide her medical expertise to the club when needed. I also appreciated how throughout most of season 1, the audience gets to learn a lot about the ins and outs of Sam Crow lifestyle, thanks to characters like her and Half-Sack, who are relative outsiders to all of this. This allows her to bring a more grounded and caring perspective towards the show's dark subject matter, which perfectly explains why Jax wants her to be a part of his life so badly. On the other hand, there are times where she comes into conflict with Jax over things that are very melodramatic, and it often makes her come across as, well, annoying for lack of a better word. Now, I don't mean that as an insult to Maggie Siff's performance, as I believe she does a particularly good job showing Tara's innocence slowly erode across every experience she has dealing with club business, all while growing closer to Jax. I especially liked how she starts off the series as the complete polar opposite to Gemma in both looks and personality, but then starts to adopt more and more of her take no bullshit attitude as they spend time together, and being just as big of a hard ass to boot.
Almost finished with the ROs. I know your guy is part of the motorcycle gang here.
My personal life has nothing to do with the hospital.
But when that personal life hits you in the face hard enough, can't help but impact your work. And then it does become the hospital's problem.
Just completing my charts.
That should have been done already.
You're just a cheap suit. Too stupid and lazy to get into med school, so now you compensate by making the healers jump through hoops.
I guess you and that biker horror you travel with.
How dare you? You don't know her. You don't know any of them.
You are finished. I'm calling security. This is assault.
No. That's assault. Well, Sam Crow has the cops on payroll this town in its pocket. You say a word about this to anyone, it'll be the biggest mistake of your little red life. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. I was like, I gotta see my friends. I gotta see what happens. I gotta see where the fuck this goes.
We missed you, girl. We missed you so much. Perlman, I mean, it's a whole different thing.
And we'll get to that. So, Mag, I want to say something because I'm going to say it because it was so. I'm telling you now that I'm watching that you are my favorite actor on the show by far, and I'm going to tell you why. Your character takes this incredible journey of like, there's so many things that happen that I didn't know. And you just said something in an episode we watched that I keep highlighting. You said, like, look what you've done to me, to Jax. Mm-hmm. And it was like the most heartbreaking line. Tara had the worst stuff happen. What was your like mental state for like those 6 years?
Holy shit, no doubt, Maggie. How was it?
I mean, I had a really good time working, but I have a really, I'm able to let it go. The thing that's interesting is I still dream about the world sometimes because the world was so intense and like operatic, and the stakes were always so high and, everybody's emotions were all over the place and, that was the job. I go home. I don't know. I had a really good, healthy time working on the show. It felt, I think all of the emotional stuff for me was probably just cathartic, more than it was traumatizing.
My main issue with Tara revolves around exactly how she gets into arguments with Jax, and at certain times when the narrative tries to make her out to be incredibly smart or badass, even when she makes many misguided and outright stupid decisions. From the very beginning, Tara is fully aware of how dangerous Jax's life is, and her storyline in Season 1 centers around her trying to figure out if she can live with that or not. As I'm sure you can imagine, given all the trouble Sam Crow gets mixed up in every day, there's no easy answer to that question, and just being associated with anyone from the club already paints a massive target on her back, so becoming Jax's official old lady, as they call it, is guaranteed to make her and their son even bigger targets. With all of that in mind, I can understand why Tara would be so hesitant to become part of the family, and even snaps towards Jax over several decisions he makes that puts them at risk in the short term. However, there are also times where she comes across as very unsympathetic towards everything Jax is dealing with as he's trying to fix Sam Crow. It wouldn't have bothered me so much if she was pointing out logistical flaws in his strategies, or warning him that he's becoming too much like Clay, but her gripes often center around the false assumption that he doesn't care about their future together, and that he's just wasting his time trying to uphold his father's legacy with no real plan behind how to see it through. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand why Tara's become so jaded after everything this life's put her through so far, and the concept that Jax is slowly starting to devalue her for the sake of the club's needs the same way Clay did with Gemma is endlessly fascinating, not to mention it would be the most cruel twist of irony. The problem is, there's barely a scene between them where Jax doesn't make it crystal clear that their family is the most important thing in his life to him, and that he's going through untold amounts of suffering and frustration just to even try to do the best he can for them all. As much as I want to empathize with Tara considering all the hell she goes through, her arguments just come across as selfish and callous, which is a shame because if Jax really had begun to only see her as a tool instead of a loving wife, she could have been forced to choose between staying to figure out whether there's still a small part of Jax that genuinely loves her, or trying to leave while she still can in order to spare their son from what his father's wrapped up in. Now, to be fair, the show does provide Tara this dilemma later on, but I wouldn't say it's written in a way that makes Tara look justified for doing this, or change the fact that her actions have only served to push Jax further away in spite of everything he's done for both their sakes. It also doesn't help that Jax did give her the opportunity to cut and run more than once, but she insisted on staying because they both realized how authentic their feelings were for each other, which I'm not saying she didn't get more than she bargained for, but there was still an understanding that they needed each other for when things got worse.
I have created this very serious life for myself. Now, when I'm inside it, I barely know myself. When I'm with you, I never ask that question.
I'm not the answer. Look at this.
I am always looking at it. Should I be here? Am I afraid to stay? Afraid to go? Afraid to be a mother? We don't know who we are till we're connected to someone else. We're just better human beings when we're with the person we're supposed to be with.
Look, I'm all for tough female characters who can believably tackle a challenge, and I'm relieved to say that Sons of Anarchy doesn't try to turn her into a forced girl boss who can instantly take down people twice her size no problem. But there comes a point where when you have a character who constantly does things like turn their back on a squirrely prisoner, make hollow threats against certain people that only put her at bigger risk, and being far too trusting with the worst kind of people, it only makes them look stupid instead of just being naive or out of their depth. To be clear, I don't think these things ruin Tara's character or diminishes her role in the story of being the source of Jax's good nature and a strong-willed person in many other instances. There's no denying that Tara earns her place as the love of his life, given everything she endures just to be with him, and even after she semi-transforms into a second Gemma, she's generally still a caring person who only wants the best for the people around her. I just wish she made it easier to appreciate her better qualities. If there's one aspect to her story I can give all the credit to, it's Kurt Sutter's willingness to show this loving relationship truly be tested and have it steadily crumble apart despite everyone's best efforts to hold it together. Making a long-term commitment to stay with one person is no easy thing, which is something a lot of people from my generation often take for granted. Sons of Anarchy deserves to be commended for showing that grim reality at the very least, just like the way it presents every other facet of Sam Crow lifestyle. Funnily enough, that mentality also applies to how the show presents many of its action scenes. If there's one thing everyone should know before getting into Sons of Anarchy, it's to not go in expecting to see shootouts and chase scenes every episode. That's not to say there isn't much action in the entire series, but more focus is often put on the build-up and the resulting drama that comes from the aftermath of these scenes, over turning them into any kind of fancy spectacle that stands out among the greatest action ever put on television. I can understand how some people will see that as a deal breaker, and I was disappointed myself by how straightforward and often disorienting many of the confrontations in the early seasons were, thanks to my two old arch nemeses, shaky cam and choppy editing. However, just like with Deadwood, the real strength behind Sons of Anarchy's action scenes is that they help to reinforce the harsh, grounded tone the show strives for in its narrative, as well as convey important information about the characters wrapped up in it. One aspect I really came to appreciate about Sons of Anarchy's action scenes is how it strikes a good balance between showing the Sons as badass outlaws during the times they carry out vigilante vigilante justice against far worse people, only to then put them in morally grey scenarios that fully demonstrate why they shouldn't be seen as heroes. A common criticism that a lot of media depicting gangsters, drug dealers, or outlaws often face is how they go to extreme lengths to glorify all the violence and debauchery they partake in, but tend to downplay how sick and disturbed many of their actions are, just so audiences can still see our main characters as more cool than monstrous. Sure, Sons of Anarchy often does pit Sam Crow against the most despicable scum imaginable, right down to literal neo-Nazis at one point, but even as it's showing these characters tear each other apart while headbanging metal music is playing in the background, it still emphasizes the fact that they're using the same savage methods against one another. So why bother being invested in them if they're all a bunch of sadistic assholes, you may ask? Well, if you've already decided that you hate the Sons based on all the clips I've shown so far, I doubt I could say anything more to change that opinion. However, if you're willing to accept that premise and see where it goes, like I said at the beginning, Sons of Anarchy does the one thing that's common among the best morally grey narratives that many modern writers completely fail at, presenting its characters and conflicts in an unbiased light and allowing the audience themselves to form their own opinions about them. The biggest advantage behind the action scenes being so direct is that they force the characters to make snap decisions in the heat of the moment, which often reveals more about their personal beliefs and underlying motivations than most extended conversations in the show. Tig, for example, is a character who's defined by these snap judgment calls, which is why most of the other Sons mainly view him as an unhinged brute who only cares about following Clay's orders to a T. As the show goes on, however, we learn that these erratic decisions are his way of expressing his undying loyalty to the club. He's willing to do so many of those impulsive and cruel actions because that's the sacrifice he'll gladly pay for his fellow brothers. It doesn't excuse what he does, of course, but that reasoning is what makes Tig a more complicated man than just being a one-note killing machine. What's more, he's not above becoming guilt-ridden over his actions, even in the name of protecting the Brotherhood. It may be a slow and subtle process at first, but whenever Tig does reach his breaking point, it ends up leading to some of the best character drama of the entire series.
She wasn't supposed to be in the truck, or... Son of a bitch. What did you do? What did you do? It was Starlo. She made you a rat. Star, she wanted to make us think that you had turned. It was supposed to be you in the truck. Sorry, Opie. I'm so sorry. Opie! I don't even know who I am anymore, man. What are you talking? I had to tell him.
At the same time, a son's choice to not engage in violence can also speak volumes about their character. One of the reasons Opie became my favorite in the entire show is because of how much he changes as a result of everything that happens to him. He starts off as a semi-reformed man who only wants to provide for his family, but as the club constantly pushes him to do riskier jobs for a bigger payday, we gradually get to see how the mere act of doing things that put him in control of his life for a change reveal that he's not so willing to give that up for honest work as his wife believed. And even with his good intentions, doing all these things that Sam Crow asks of its members will inevitably turn him down a darker path all the same. Unfortunately, that's what ends up happening to him anyway, and it doesn't take long for Opie to be completely on board with the worst aspects of Sam Crow business, all so he can gain Clay's favor and use his ties to the Brotherhood as his way of coping with everything he's already lost. The fact that he becomes so methodical and borderline psychopathic when it comes to killing is what gives so much weight to even the most simplistic exchange of gunfire, because it further reinforces how far he's fallen from being the honorable man who was trying to turn his life around at the beginning. With all that being said, even someone as broken as Opie ultimately becomes can still choose to do the right thing by subverting what an average person would expect a son to do against anyone who wronged them, and instead do what's best for the few people in their life they still care about, which ends up becoming the most valuable lesson he passes on to Jax.
What do you want from me?
I want you to feel what I feel.
I never thought that you or your family would get hurt, Opie.
Don't you dare try to pass the blame. The outlaw had mercy. You remember that the next time you try to twist the truth to kill one of us.
At the end of the day, whether people are engaged or disappointed by Sons of Anarchy's action all comes down to preference, and I have no problem with anyone who insists it's the weakest part of the show, or at least it's the part that could have been executed better. The main reason why a show that has subpar action doesn't bother me so much is because that's never been the major appeal behind television shows until recently. We can all laugh at how goofy and cheap the fight scenes in things like Star Trek or Buffy the Vampire Slayer are, but what makes those shows and many others with slim budgets like them stand the test of time is the fact their storytelling and characterization is still second to none compared to many modern stories today, and their somewhat basic action doesn't get in the way of those strengths. It all comes down to just being honest about who your characters are and letting that follow its natural course. I'm sure there will still be people who don't think much of Sons of Anarchy's action anyway, and I wouldn't even say they're wrong for not getting much out of just watching people shoot each other or race each other on their Harleys, but I still believe it has an important narrative function all the same, and it still beats a lot of modern shows that can't build narrative stakes, or even make their action look moderately competent. As you can probably tell by now, I greatly enjoyed watching Sons of Anarchy, but do you know what made it more enjoyable to watch nowadays compared to when it first aired? What makes Sons of Anarchy so refreshing is just how far Kurt Sutter and the other writers were willing to go to give people a clear, unobstructed picture of what this outlaw lifestyle is really like. They weren't afraid to show that there are net benefits to it, like all of the money they accumulate by running guns for morally bankrupt Irishmen, and the appeal of living by your own rules instead of whatever society dictates, but were also just as committed to showing how this way of life can end up destroying healthy, close-knit relationships, as well as corrupt anybody the longer they stay embroiled in it. In essence, it just gives you the cold, hard truth and lets the audience determine for themselves whether Jax is doing the right thing trying to fix Sam Crow for the sake of its more decent members like Opie, Chibs, and Juice, or write him off as a hopeless idealist who can't change what Clay has set in stone for decades. Sons of Anarchy may not be a series I can easily recommend to people who are looking for a good time, but it is a show that does an excellent job tackling difficult dilemmas that most people struggle with in real life, and doesn't try to push any kind of simplistic, naive message as an answer. Sometimes, the reality we all have to face can be ugly and hard to accept, even push us to do undignified things just to get by. However, that doesn't mean things are always going to stay that way, and it's typically people like Jax who continue to fight for what they believe in no matter how many times they get pushed down that end up creating some level of change, which has the potential to become something greater as long as they continue to work at it and don't lose sight of what's most important to them. While the Sons as a group can be hard to sympathize with for many reasons, that philosophy serves as the underlying motivation behind why many of them can still be driven to be as selfless as they are selfish, because looking out for each other often is the most important thing to them. That commitment to stand by each other and punish anyone who threatens them is what makes the Sons of Anarchy compelling to follow despite their flaws, since unlike nearly all of their enemies, they actually function like a real family. They bicker over trivial matters, mourn the losses of their fellow brothers together, but most importantly of all, when it comes to the members who genuinely believe in what their club was founded on, never sell out one of their own to an outsider. To put it simply, Sons of Anarchy is a story about how one man goes through absolute hell trying to unite his wayward family and has to live with all of the blessings and harsh drawbacks that come from being a part of it. Just like Hamlet, Macbeth, and the rest of Shakespeare's best work, it's a gritty drama that's packed with tragedy and many painful lessons, but it also manages to squeeze in plenty of humor along the way and still provides a hopeful message at the very end, even though there are a lot of brutal deaths, gut-punch betrayals, depressing twists, and some languid pacing by seasons 5 and 6 along the way. I firmly believe it's all worth it just to get to that final moment of Jax riding on the open road without a care in the world and living up to his father the best way he can. Thanks for watching. I admit, I had some trouble making this video in particular because most of Sons of Anarchy's best moments are heavily tied to major developments surrounding the plot and characters, and it already felt like I had spoiled a little too much just by giving a small overview of what some of the characters go through. My main goal with these videos is to get as many people as possible to see the things I cover, but still preserve the experience of seeing those big moments unfold for themselves. In any case, I'm still glad I got this video out, since it's at least one more video on YouTube that explores why Sons of Anarchy is a great show, which is a lot better than close to none. I've already started getting clips for my next video, so I can guarantee for sure it won't take as long to make like this one. Be sure to follow me on Twitter so you can see whenever I drop a new update, or if you want to see me royally piss off Disney and Silent Hill 2 remake fans. Alright, I'm the Elusive Eye. Make sure you enjoy the ride while it lasts.